Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so if you follow modern medicine at all, you've definitely heard the blockbuster story of GLP-1 medicines. Things like semaglutide,
That's
tirzepatide.
absolutely, they're everywhere.
And the common wisdom is pretty simple, right? They help people lose weight, control blood sugar, standard stuff.
Yeah.
But today, we're diving into some sources that reveal something, well, totally different, almost like a secret superpower.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
They seem to be powerful anti-inflammatory agents. And that effect, that power, might explain a lot more about their benefits way beyond just the numbers on the scale.
That's exactly the core of our deep dive today. Our mission, really, is to unpack the evidence showing these anti-inflammatory actions are, significant in their own right, some of it completely separate from any weight loss.
Independent of weight loss.
Yeah, independent. We're going to look at some real-world data comparing the big players head-to-head on cardiovascular risk, which is crucial, and then we'll introduce you to what might be the next big thing in this whole area.
Yeah.
A really interesting new target called NLRP3. The thinking is this could be a more, let's say, surgical weapon against that chronic low-grade inflammation, what some scientists are now calling inflammaging.
Inflammaging. Okay, I like that. And just to set the stage, we already know these GLP-1 drugs do more than just weight loss. They cut down on serious complications from type 2 diabetes and obesity. We see big wins for, like, cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease.
Precisely. And it's not just those. I mean, the number of ongoing trials is just staggering. They're looking at metabolic liver disease, MASH, rheumatoid arthritis, even neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's.
Okay.
It really suggests we kind of misunderstood the initial mechanism, or at least underestimated its breadth. We thought, okay, appetite control, but it looks like we're actually regulating entire body systems.
Okay, let's unpack that then.
Yeah.
We mostly think of them as weight loss drugs. How big a deal is this anti-inflammatory part? The bit that has, nothing to do with losing weight. Feels like the most surprising piece here.
It's remarkably large. So one way we measure systemic inflammation is using C-reactive protein, CRP. You've probably heard of it.
Right, CRP, often high in obesity and diabetes.
Exactly. It's often chronically elevated. So researchers looked back at the big semaglutide trials, Sustain and Pioneer. They tried to figure out, okay, how much of the drop in CRP was just because people's blood sugar got better or because they lost weight?
They try to isolate the effect.
Yeah, mathematically. And what did they find?
Tell me.
Those usual suspects, weight loss and glucose control, they only explained about, get this, 20% to 60% of the total reduction they saw in CRP.
Wait, hang on. Only 20 to 60%. So even on the high end, that leaves 40% of the anti-inflammatory effect coming from somewhere else.
Exactly. And if it's the low end, 20%, that means 80% of the benefit is something else entirely, something immune-related.
So why did the whole story start with appetite and weight loss if this other effect is potentially so massive?
Well, because the weight loss was the most obvious, the most immediate effect, That's what grabs headlines. But the sources we're looking at show GLP-1s are talking directly to the immune system.
Oh.
Well, one key way starts right in the gut. There are these specialized cells, L cells, that produce GLP-1. We knew they sense nutrients, but it turns out they're also like tiny alarm bells.
Like a built-in border patrol for the gut.
That's a great way to put it. They're pathogen and inflammation sensors. So if they detect danger signals, things like bacterial bits, endotoxins, or even inflammatory molecules like IL-1, they pump out GLP-1.
Instantly.
Seems like an acute frontline response, yeah. And it doesn't stop there. The GLP-1 receptor, the thing the drug targets, it's actually found on immune cells themselves.
So the drug isn't just working indirectly, it's actually docking right onto the immune cells.
It is. The signaling that follows seems to directly dampen down the activity of certain immune cells, particularly T cells.
T cells. Those are the ones often involved in chronic inflammation, right?
Exactly. Think of them as part of the immune system's main force. GLP-1 seems to put the brakes on their more aggressive functions, reducing the inflammatory signals, the cytokines they release.
Okay, gut sensors, direct immune cell action. Anything else? You mentioned the brain earlier.
Yes, and this is where it gets really intricate and fascinating. There's evidence GLP-1 medicines can tamp down systemic inflammation, like acutely, through the central nervous system.
How does that work?
It seems to require the GLP-1 receptor to be active on neurons in the brain. Essentially, the drug triggers this complex neuroimmune crosstalk. The brain sends out signals using other systems like adrenergic and opioid receptors, basically telling the whole immune system body-wide, okay, stand down a bit, threat level's lower.
Which helps explain why this anti-inflammatory benefit seems so widespread. You listed the heart, liver, kidneys, joints, and maybe even brain and lungs.
Yeah, the list keeps growing. It really looks like a systemic inflammation regulator that just happened to be discovered because of its effects on diabetes and obesity.
Okay, so now that we get this deeper kind of weight-independent power, the obvious question is, which drug is better at it? We've got semaglutide, the pure GLP-1 agonist, versus tirzepatide, the dual agonist hitting both GLP-1 and GIP receptors.
Right, the head-to-head question everyone wants answered.
Exactly. We see amazing weight loss from both, but crucially, there hasn't been a big randomized trial comparing them directly on, the really important stuff, preventing heart attacks, strokes, death.
And that's the classic research gap, isn't it? You can't always run a massive years-long randomized controlled trial, an RCT, for every single comparison. It's just not feasible.
So what do we do?
That's why the study we looked at using huge U.S. claims databases is so important. They use this clever method called RCT duplicator, basically trying to mimic an RCT using real-world data.
Mimic an RCT. How can we, trust that?
Well, what they do first is crucial. They validate the method. They check if they can reproduce the known results from landmark trials we do have, like SUSTAIN-6 for semaglutide and the SURPASS cardiovascular trial program for tirzepatide.
Ah, okay. So they test the mimic against reality first.
Exactly. Once they show their method works, then they apply it to compare tirzepatide and semaglutide in the much broader, kind of messier population you see in everyday clinics. And they focused on ME, major adverse cardiovascular events.
Which is the standard combo of, what, death, heart attack, or stroke?
That's the one. All-cause mortality, myocardial infarction, or stroke.
So, moment of truth. What did the real-world data show when comparing these two heavyweights?
Well, first off, looking at wider populations, both drugs clearly confirm their benefits compared to older or different types of drugs. Semaglutide cut the risk of heart attack or stroke with a hazard ratio around 0.82 compared to a proxy drug.
Okay, so about an 18% reduction.
Roughly, yeah. And tirzepatide, when compared against an older GLP-1 drug, showed a very similar risk reduction, hazard ratio around 0.87. So, bottom line, both are definitely effective in the real world.
But the key question, the direct comparison, tirzepatide versus semaglutide. Does that extra GIP action give tirzepatide an edge for heart attacks and strokes?
For that main MC outcome, the big events, the one-year risk was remarkably similar. The hazard ratio comparing tirzepatide directly to semaglutide was 1.06.
1.06. So slightly higher risk for tirzepatide,
But crucially, the confidence interval, the range of statistical uncertainty, comfortably included 1.0. It spanned from 0.95 to 1.18.
which means, statistically speaking,
It strongly suggests no significant difference between the two drugs in reducing ME in real-world clinical practice. They seem comparable on that main endpoint.
that's a really important finding for doctors and patients. I mean, if the dual action isn't clearly better for preventing heart attacks and strokes, the choice might come down to other things.
Exactly, like individual response, side effects, cost, availability, although there was maybe one little nuance in the data.
Oh,
While MA overall was similar, there was a slight signal, a point estimate, hinting that tirzepatide might have a modest edge specifically for heart failure outcomes.
heart failure, like keeping people out of the hospital.
Yeah, specifically a composite of heart failure hospitalization, an urgent heart failure visit, or death. The hazard ratio there was 0.91 for tirzepatide compared to semaglutide.
So not a slam dunk, but maybe a slight lean towards tirzepatide for heart failure.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense, given GIP's metabolic roles, maybe?
It's consistent with some other things we're hearing, yes. But again, for the big picture on preventing heart attacks and strokes, they look like they're playing in the same league.
Okay, so that sets the stage perfectly for this next part. If GLP-1s are doing this amazing job regulating both metabolism and inflammation, what happens if we bring in a drug that only focuses on the inflammation part, like really targets the root cause?
Right. And that leads us straight to NLRP3. This protein is being talked about as potentially the master switch for that chronic low-grade inflammation we mentioned, the inflammaging.
Master switch.
Okay.
Okay. How does it work differently from GLP-1s?
Well, think of it this way. GLP-1s seem to react to and modulate existing inflammation, partly through those gut and neuroimmune pathways. NLRP3, on the other hand, is thought to be a central sensor inside cells. It detects all sorts of danger signals, things like cholesterol crystals, protein clumps like amyloid, metabolic stress
The
signals.
stuff that builds up with age and drives chronic disease.
Exactly. It senses those triggers and then kicks off a major inflammatory cascade, releasing powerful molecules like IL-1. So targeting NLRP3 is like trying to disable the alarm system before the fire spreads everywhere.
And how does this complement the GLP-1 story? Are there results yet?
Oh, yeah. The early clinical results for NLRP3 inhibitors are, well, pretty dramatic. We looked at a phase 2 trial for one called VTX3232 from Ventyx. They gave it to patients who had obesity and high cardiovascular risk.
Right.
After just 12 weeks, this inhibitor achieved a nearly 78% reduction in high-sensitivity CRP.
78%, that's huge, a massive drop in inflammation. But here's the critical question. Did it also make them lose weight like a GLP-1?
And that's the absolute key distinction. No. VTX3232 did not cause weight loss.
Wow.
Even when they tested it in combination with semaglutide, the weight loss came from the semaglutide. But the big, rapid drop in CRP seemed to be driven by the NLRP3 inhibitor.
So, okay, this is a clear separation. GLP-1s handle metabolism, weight, and have anti-inflammatory effects. NLRP3 inhibitors are going straight for the inflammation, seemingly independent of metabolism or appetite.
Precisely. It suggests they're targeting that residual inflammatory risk, the chronic smoldering fire that might persist even if you manage weight and glucose. It really supports the idea that metabolic dysfunction and chronic inflammation are maybe two separate, though often linked drivers of disease.
And if NLRP3 is this central danger sensor, does that mean inhibiting it could work for lots of different diseases?
That's the hope, and why some are calling it a potential pipeline in a product, because it's implicated everywhere.
Like where else?
Well, think neurodegeneration. NLRP3 gets activated by those protein clumps we associate with diseases like Parkinson's alpha-synuclein or Alzheimer's amyloid beta. Early trials with inhibitors like VTX3232 and another one called NT0796 are showing they can actually reduce inflammatory markers in the spinal fluid.
In humans.
Yes, in patients. Things like IL-1, IL-6. And maybe even more promising, some small studies in Parkinson's patients reported statistically significant improvements in actual symptoms, both motor and non-motor.
That's potentially game-changing, moving way beyond just heart disease or diabetes.
Absolutely. And then you look at atherosclerosis heart disease. NLRP3 gets activated by cholesterol crystals forming inside the artery walls. That drives the inflammation that makes plaques unstable.
So it could stabilize plaques.
That's theory. And in the liver, for MASH, the serious fatty liver disease NLRP3 activation seems to be a key step driving the inflammation and scarring, the fibrosis. Plus, you have conditions like gout, which is almost a classic NLRP3-driven disease, rheumatoid arthritis, kidney disease, the list goes on.
It really does sound like a central node, controlling that chronic inflammation tied to so many diseases of aging.
It seems that way. So just to kind of synthesize what we've covered, we've seen clear evidence that GLP-1s offer these profound anti-inflammatory benefits, and importantly, a lot of that is independent of weight loss. This helps explain their success in reducing cardiovascular risk and other complications.
Right.
The real-world data then showed us that, for now, the big players semaglutide and tirzepatide seem pretty comparable in terms of preventing major cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes.
Although maybe a slight hint towards tirzepatide for heart failure specifically.
A slight hint, yeah. And now we have the emergence of these NLRP3 inhibitors. A totally different mechanism, a potentially powerful new tool that directly targets inflammation at its root without messing with metabolism or appetite like the GLP-1s do.
You know, what really stands out to me from all this is it feels like the future isn't going to be about finding one magic bullet for cardiometabolic health or even longevity. It's pointing towards combinations.
Smart combinations, yes.
You've got the GLP-1s doing their incredible work on metabolism, weight, and contributing to inflammation control. And then maybe you bring in an NLRP3 inhibitor to specifically snuff out that residual chronic inflammation, that inflammaging.
It makes a lot of sense biologically.
It really suggests we might be heading towards an era where doctors could use like a preventative triad of therapies. You've got statins, which we've had for decades, managing the lipids. Then you have GLP-1s tackling the metabolic dysfunction and weight. And now, potentially, NLRP3 inhibitors to directly target the chronic inflammation.
Targeting all the major pillars.
Exactly. Hitting lipids, metabolism, and inflammation. That feels like a truly comprehensive approach to tackling the root causes of chronic disease and maybe even the biology of aging itself. Something really powerful to think about.